Hiya folks, I'm serious now. I don't talk lightly anymore. I respect gay people, I do respect trans people, but I respect it more when someone can scare me. I've never met a queer person who did that before. Yes?
Hey, I work for the IRS, and we need you to send us real money on Robux gift cards. Also, I'm queer.
Queer people and stereotypes in media go hand in hand, unfortunately. They're often used for cheap plot devices in fiction and reality. We've got gay people being seen as evil villains trying to tear apart straight families in books of the past, and we've got gay people being the evil villain trying to tear apart a straight family in real life too, according to really dumb people who hold all political power on Earth. It's a good thing I don't live there. Stereotyping affects people of all walks of life and in all mediums of storytelling, but it's pretty noticeable in horror, right? With the genre's final girls, it's jocks, it's black guys who are black, it's gay comedic side characters and what have you. There's entire films parodying the horror genre's stereotyping.
Fuck you!
Gaming's no different.
Outlast? Poop. They put poop in this game.
I mean, most of my favorite horror games are about a white guy who's gotta find his wife, or a white male who must find his wife, or they're about a white dude who must find wife. Not to mention my most favorite one that ends up having queer rep in it too. Outlast 2. It's about a white guy who's gotta find his wow, for the love of God. In the early 2010s, a team of 10 former Ubisoft developers made their own company to self-release their first game, and it came out in 2013, with 1 million Canadian dollars in funding from the Canadian government somehow. Do they know what they were funding? Because Outlast is absolutely one of the most deviant, goriest, bloodthirsty, sexually secular video games ever made, not to be rated adults only. Outlast 2 followed in 2017, but it didn't follow Outlast 1 back on Twitter. That's sad. Hope they're alright. Like its predecessor, it too contains all of the above and more. There's also the Outlast Trials, a cooperative prequel, but I've not played it enough to judge its merits, and that's not my main focus today. When replaying the games, I've noticed a variety of themes over time. Outlast has many themes, many beyond its obvious themes of intense violence, gore,
graphic sexual content, and strong language. Please enjoy. What do you mean, please enjoy?
The underlying story of both the first and second game is of abuse, victimization, capitalism, and shock value. The nuance in a game like Outlast is there, but it became a viral hit for a reason.
Wipe his butt for him.
In-your-face jumpiness around every corner. Outlast 1's about a journalist with a camera investigating an asylum run by Murkoff Corporation, who've been experimenting on the inmates. Outlast 2 is about a journalist's husband named Blake, separated from his wife Lynn in an isolated town run by the Testament of the New Ezekiel, a violent Judgment Day cult who thinks Lynn is the Antichrist's mother. Blake has to find her, get out of the town, ignore all the visions he's getting of a long-buried childhood trauma from Catholic school, ignore all the illnesses he's getting, try to save Lynn from a second faction of this cult town that wants the Antichrist to be born, actually. It's really an ordinary day for a journalist's husband. Blake not being the journalist himself is pretty important in how the game plays. Blake isn't looking for answers, he just wants to leave with Lynn. It's a game that lets you draw your own conclusions from what's going on instead of insisting on an objective reality or statement of anything going on, until you yourself can recontextualize the game's events when you finish it. So now that we know the game chooses not to give you answers, let's find answers about something the devs probably never asked. Does Outlast do queer characters well? Each game in the series features moments of queerness since they really hone in on graphic sexual horror scenarios a lot of the time. Outlast 1 only has a few queer moments in it. A gay necrophiliac yells at you for watching him do gay necrophiliac things.
You weren't invited to this, you goddamn sicko!
You like to watch?
It's sick. You're sick.
Yes, I'm the bad guy in this situation. In the DLC, a patient nicknamed Groom forcibly transitions men to women against their will so he can make them into a proper wife. Like I said, the exploration of queerness in the first game is few and far between, with the topic not being the primary point of exploration. It's addressing on the real topic, violence and exploitation and jump scares. These only have to do with anything queer because it's in the first game. AFAB people can't be present or else they'll literally die. It's not misogyny, it's a plot device. This leaves solely AMAB characters in which situations of utter depravity will bring out homosexuality in many. $20 is $20, but what happens when all the money is gone? A lot happens. Outlast 2 is different in its portrayal of queer topics and what I've been thinking about the most, having featured an entire transgender character, Valve. First off, a lot of wikis label Val as a bi-trans woman, which I'm not comfortable stating as fact, but their gender and sexuality are ambiguous enough that I'll stick to using they-them pronouns for Val in the rest of this videotape. Does Outlast approach these topics cautiously? No, that's an underlined no in this series. It's a game that heavily relies on shock value, sometimes going way too far. So why are queer things in these games? Were they put in with understanding, or were they put in to gross the player out, to shock them, or a secret third reason?
No.
As if a long history of queer representation being botched or hateful in media wasn't enough, I'm taking slow steps in analyzing this, since even great pieces of media can be a little difficult in modern context. It's not that weird to be thinking a game antagonist could be created to cause a reaction of a phobia, besides the arachnophobia caused by spiders in Lethal Company, the thalassophobia in Subnautica, or claustrophobia of Resident Evil. But in this case, I mean homophobia. As usual, my brain's been stuck in one mode, thinking about Half-Life. Oh my god! Glover for N64. Half-Life is my favorite game series of all time. Gordon Freeman's a trans man and Barty Calhoun's gay for him. Trust me, don't Google Griggle anything about Half-Life because I'm right. A cut enemy for Half-Life 1 still in its files is this thing. It's called Mr. Friendly. Though not a human, it was intended to be something that elicits a homophobic response by sexually assaulting the player. Obviously, this got cut from the game because that does not fit in an otherwise grounded sci-fi story, not about that. But learning that was going to be in Half-Life doesn't diminish what I feel about the game, its creators, or its concept artists. It's healthy to think back on what didn't work and why it didn't work, even if it's a little uncomfortable in a modern context. Val's the most unique of Outlast 2 villains, being a former Testament member, now dissenter, who leads the Heretics, a split faction believing the cult to be disillusioned. These splitters believe in pleasure and hedonism above all else, but their leader's a hypocrite. Val criticizes the Testament for lying and raping people, but detailed in Val's journal shows they find sexual satisfaction in the exact same acts. Val is many things, but why do we know they're trans? Well, we get the biggest hints from Val's journal, some notes from other cultists addressing Val, and their in-game appearance. Their voice is done by a woman, yet the Testament's leader always refers to them as a he. In a personal journal, they wrote, 6 more of my own children, though no blood of my own, met the blade this morning. I wept as at the slaughter of the issue of my own loins. Which to me implies a bottom surgery, although it could be representative of losing children in a maternal way. Either way, that still indicates being trans to me, as Val has a lot of masculine features, so either way, it still indicates not being cisgender. In their first appearance, they wear a dress, but later on, they're naked with breasts and genitalia seemingly shaped out of mud rather than really being there. And when asked what Val's gender is, developers commented, Val is Val. By all of this, the heavy implication is that Val is a trans character, but if they're a trans woman or non-binary is totally up in the air. When thinking of Val as a trans character, I immediately think of the many stereotypes Val falls into. Trans and queer people as a whole are labeled many things. They get called very cool, very, very cool, and super awesome sauce. But they sometimes get called sex obsessed, rapists, obsessed with children, mentally ill, groomers, way more negative stuff. I like the first ones better. Normally these negative traits get applied to all of the LGBTQ as a group, but they're given to single persons all the time too. Val's journals do mention children a lot, but not in the way you'd think. When Val lived with the Testament, babies were murdered en masse because the will of God said so. And Val wasn't a fan. So no, they didn't do anything bad with kids. They did help kill kids, but not the other kind of. There isn't any grooming either from Val. Not in the entire Outlast series, besides the groom. But he doesn't groom anybody unless you count cleaning them, and that definition of grooming, and murdering them. There's a lot to discuss about the groom that I can't particularly get into. There's already a very excellent analysis of this character called Queer Fear and Outlast Whistleblower, made by internet funny person Video Nasty. Every thought I could have, they've already said, and any thought I do have isn't really related to the queerness of it all. It's pretty clear he's a mentally ill guy that thinks he's entitled to a wife who will give him a child, views them as property, and resorts to cutting up men for his pleasure because that's the only gender he has access to. It has comparisons with how trans people are stereotyped, but it's not intentional, clearly, as more of a play on forced feminization. However, Val is sex obsessed, and so are all the heretics. Heretic MO is to do and believe the opposite of what the original cult faction does. The Testament of the New Ezekiel are a group of God God-fearing Christians who proclaim God loves them in twisted ways, while heretics think unholy self-love is their way. They follow the Antichrist. The testament of the new Ezekiel, they follow, guess who? New Ezekiel, but he and everyone else follow regular Christ, or pro-Christ, professional Christ as opposed to amateur Christ. Val is also a rapist. Yeah, that part isn't really fun to talk about. I want to think, were these stereotypes that Val very definitely fits into put into the game by the writers maliciously? And I really have to say no. Were they put in out of ignorance? I'm not so sure. Val is constantly talking about lust, wanting to share their love with Blake to spread the coming Antichrist's vision. I guess they're a man, woman, being of their word. In their first encounter, Val licks Blake very sexually, and after many hours, Blake finds them again before being drugged and is then implied to be raped. Cut from the game was a more explicit rape scene. One of 2 cut scenes like that from the game. This is the best example of how Outlast 2 goes way too far in many areas. Excessive gruesomeness can be good and all that in the right story. Outlast 1 shows way more than it needs to, and that story is fantastic. But for a game trying to be as nuanced as Outlast 2, more than the first one, the gore, the sex, the violence, the rape scenes, these are too much, even down to the soundtrack being too much.
Composer Samuel Laflamme is quoted saying, "At one point I think I went too far, and Phil from Red Barrels felt it would be too intense to put in the ears of gamers during 30 minutes of gameplay. It's too intense. I had to tone it down a bit, and in the album it was possible to put them at the right place."
That clip comes from a Nick Carlson press video. Their video on Outlast 2's cut content was fantastic. It demonstrates the level of overkill that ruined a lot of nuance trying to be explored in this game. Outlast 2 is a bit like the film Spider-Man 3, in that nothing is similar between them. Literally nothing at all. Not comparable in the slightest. One's the cheesiest superhero movie ever made, and the other's a family-friendly game filled with fun things and life lessons at religion school. But Spider-Man 3 has 3 different villains, technically 4, all vying for screen time in a movie too shallow to do any of them justice for the complexity they're set up for. Can you guess what Outlast 2 does? This problem extends to Val, with them being my favorite villain to analyze, yet being rushed in and out of the story in their limited screen time, lacking proper presence when finally given their spotlight, and being given nuance the narrative has 0 time or willpower to explore. Val's transness feels like a belly flop in a kiddie pool. Don't get me wrong, a trans character being trans doesn't have to be a focal point of the story they're in, but with the level of stereotyping this game fails to address, especially for something made in the past decade, it feels like a huge oversight. Val has a lot of reasons to be the way they are. Their actions are a reflection of the environment they live in. This isn't an excuse for anything they've done, but I mean, they're being manipulated to believe in a god that finds murder fine, and it's all because of an evil corporation. So what I mean is that capitalism is bad, and Val is completely just in everything they do. That was me from an alternate reality. As can be seen here, it's ridiculous to put all blame off of someone because of the system they're in. Take a moment and think about how insane that version of me is. I'm not like that. Yeah? Oh, my 40th copy of Half-Life 2 arrived. Put it in the pile with the others. Like I was saying, I'm normal. Val from Outlast 2 isn't. A villain can be a trans character, that is perfectly fine. I just feel as if making a character trans in modern day, in a story like this, which heavily goes into the systematic exploitation of individuals, really shows that they thought they were doing this way more respectfully than they realized. In a game where every character is in one way or another to varying degrees victims of systems way outside of their control, something more critical than trans character being the leader of a bloodthirsty sex cult would have been a little better than what we got. Due to Murkoff Corporation, the company from the first game's placement, or rather non-placement in this game's story, seeing as their influence is only found in secret messages in a secret company building way off in the distance, I can't blame the writers for making a trans character this way. Murkoff is exploiting these people to act the way they do, so nearly every person is characterized as both villains and victims, including Val, but that doesn't excuse their actions. They've been experimented on by an evil corporation their whole lives, and some are so out of it they don't even know what's going on anymore. But that doesn't excuse anyone's actions. I know the stereotyping of Val is a slip-up instead of malice to trans people because of how little Val's transness affects the story if you remove it. If removed, They simply become yet another culty person wanting to kill Blake, although in their case this also includes having sex with him first. That factor combined with Val's transness is the concerning part. The thing is though, them being trans doesn't really seem to have an effect on their lustfulness. They seem to be things that are completely independent of one another in Val's mind, at least by the limited information we get via their journal. Val's transness is really not a factor outside of their appearance and journal entries which explain this to us. It's something a player could easily miss in a first or second playthrough. No other character is trans either. It's not like Val's heretics are all a bunch of trans people. I really feel more trans characters would even be implied to exist in the world of the story if the intent was hate towards a group. Sure, this is a story which intends to have an incomplete picture for you to fill the gaps around, but there's nothing that would indicate pure hatred. Ambiguity in its victimization of these characters is true. It goes to great lengths to make sure that side is seen, yet also spends a much larger portion of the runtime having you end up unsympathetic towards most characters. You're chased, beaten, cursed at, and murdered by the very victims this game wants you to empathize with. Outlast 2, like Outlast 1, is a game that doesn't draw all of its own conclusions for you. The emotion a player is meant to feel remains ambiguous. Real ambiguous there, guys. One way it does this is by having the protagonists of both games contribute to continued suffering of patients, cultists, as they have no other choice at the time. And you do harm to yourself too. Definitely yourself, because Blake is the clumsiest person since me when I'm playing as him. This of course manifests with Val as their transness is not a focal point, more world building that was meant to be a contrast to the cult, which got out of hand. That's something a lot of people would say about Outlast 2. I still love this game, it just has its problems. Whether you think the game owns up to its goals well enough can be controversial. I certainly think it does, though its disjointed, messy execution and excessive graphic content keeps it from being as great as the original, especially in its portrayal of an at-harm group like trans people, and mud people who live in mines, a group threatened by society at large. I really just think they wanted the shock value of a character raping the main character and didn't stop to think that maybe that isn't a good idea and that maybe it shouldn't be the trans character doing it. But most importantly, that it isn't a very good idea. Really, what I've been trying to say this whole time is fuck you, Jimmy.